What is the Honor 6X? Honor, a spin-off from Huawei, appears to be more focused on viral marketing aimed at its supposedly millennial audience than making decent phones. That may sound harsh, but when your brand's slogan is "Number for the brave" and the tagline for this particular phone is "Double or Nothing," you're setting the expectation that the Honor 6X is something out of the ordinary. It's not. It's just a fairly standard mid-range device that covers the basics and does nothing much beyond. Honor 6X design. Hold the Honor 6X at a distance and it looks like quite an expensive, if predictable, piece of kit. It has that often recycled sloped metal back with slightly curved corners and a 2.5D glass display. A circular fingerprint scanner sits below the dual camera setup, and it's nice to see both these features on an affordable phone. Honor makes great fingerprint sensors, and the one that's used here is no different. It's on the small side, but setup is fast and unlocking the phone is instantaneous. Get a little closer, or actually pick up the phone, and the fact this handset costs £225 becomes more apparent. The metal feels almost plastic-like, with just a thin layer of metallic spray added on top. The buttons, too, are quite mushy and have already started to stick into the body of the phone. I'm not convinced about the longevity here. Those niggles aside, Honor has got quite a lot right. Considering the 5.5-inch display is on the larger side, it's a very manageable phone. I can use it in one hand without any issues and the bezel is kept to a minimum. It's slim too, and won't stand out in your pocket. The headphone jack sits offset on the top. I think it should always be on the bottom, but that's more of a personal opinion, and there's a micro USB port on the bottom. That's an odd choice and screams of using up old factory parts on a cheaper phone, especially since nearly all phones this year will feature USB Type-C. There's nothing glaringly wrong with the Honor 6X's design, but there's equally nothing here to appeal to the target audience. The dull selection of gray, gold, and silver colors only compound the feel of a handset that lacks personality. It just looks like any other imported Chinese phone. Honor 6X display. When it comes to the display, things are a little more positive. It's 5.5 inches in size and an LCD panel running at 1080p. Considering it's still very common to see brands Samsung with the Galaxy A3 and Sony's Xperia XA being two examples use 720p displays at this end of the market, I appreciate Honor not skimping. The screen ticks most of the boxes. It's accurate at representing colors, gets bright enough to combat the sun, and doesn't turn to mush when you tilt it. Colors don't have quite the punch you'd get with an AMOLED panel. Reds are a bit washed out and blacks lack depth, but you can toggle settings slightly to try to combat this. Honor 6X software. For some reason, Honor has decided to launch the 6X with completely out-of-date software, even though most Huawei or older Honor phones are being updated to the newer EMUI 5 that's built upon Android 7. The jump from Android 6.0.1 Marshmallow to 7.0 Nougat wasn't huge for most phones, but it was for Huawei and Honor devices. EMUI 5 completely gutted the OS and improved everything from the general design to the notifications panel. An app drawer was added, Google integration actually worked as it should, and there was a noticeable performance improvement. With the Honor 6X, you get none of this. Not only is EMUI ugly, but often it simply refuses to correctly sync my Google accounts. It also likes to restart frequently, completely quitting out of all the apps and rebooting the whole phone. Honor has said it will upgrade the phones later in the year, but with Android Nougat being out for a while now, it's less acceptable. There are quite a few bloatware apps and games pre-installed, but thankfully, each of these can be deleted. Honor 6X Performance. Powering the Honor 6X is HiSilicon's Kirin 655 CPU, a brand new mid-range processor that's on a similar level to Snapdragon's 625. It's an efficient piece of silicon, and one that has enough power to comfortably perform many of the tasks you'll want to throw at it. Kirin chips used to be known for their unreliable performance, but that view has softened recently, and I'd say that the 655 and the higher-end Kirin 960 are the most consistent yet. You do still get some random slowdowns, but I'd put that down to the older software at use here. The majority of 3D games work fine, although gameplay isn't quite as smooth as on higher-end processors, and less intensive titles run perfectly. The chip is supported by 3GB of RAM and 32GB of onboard storage. Honor will also sell a version with 4GB of RAM and 64GB storage, but considering there's a microSD card slot, that extra gig of RAM won't add much to performance, so I wouldn't suggest upgrading. In benchmarking tests, the Honor achieved slightly higher Geekbench 4 scores than the Moto G4, but both phones are in the same ballpark. In the Geekbench multi-core test, the Honor 6X scored 3,270 while the Moto G4 picked up 3,067. The downward-firing speakers are adequate but easy to block. Call quality is good, but the microphones are noticeably weaker than Huawei's phones, so expect wind to cause big problems. Honor 6X Camera. The only real standout addition to the Honor 6X is the extra camera on the rear of the device, giving it a similar setup to a Mate 9 or iPhone 7 Plus. It works more like the Mate 9 rather than the iPhone, though, instead of offering up zoom functionality, it uses the extra sensor to try to add depth to photos. It is possible to alter the aperture, from f/0.95 to f/6.5, to add bokeh effects to snaps. Bokeh is where the background blurs and the subject stays in sharp focus. It used to be achievable on only DSLRs. The 12-megapixel main sensor takes quite good photos, but the wide aperture effects afforded by the second 2-megapixel sensor are very hit and miss. Even pricey phones struggle to achieve accurate definition between subject and background, so it's hardly a surprise the Honor 6X misses the mark more often than not. Sticking with the default settings, pictures are well defined and bright. Colors are reasonably accurate, although often a bit washed out in sunnier conditions. It takes good landscape shots and captures strong tones with portraits, but this isn't redefining the product category. Snaps are marginally clearer than the Moto G4, and nighttime shooting is noticeably sharper. Low-light pictures are still quite noisy and blurry, so make sure to keep your hands still. I'd go as far as to say that the second sensor is more a gimmick than a feature you'll use. It's great to see this sort of thing come to cheaper phones, but it's so inconsistent it becomes frustrating. On the front there's a 8-megapixel selfie camera that captures a decent representation of skin. Just avoid the beauty mode. Honor 6X battery life. Honor makes big claims about the stamina of the 6X, and it does have the specs to match. The 3,340 mAh cell is sizable, especially when you take into account the supposedly efficient CPU and 1080p display. And for the most part the Honor 6X impresses, but it fails to live up to the hype. I can easily make it through the day, however, with about 10% left. An hour of Netflix streaming takes up between 9 to 11%, which is slightly more than I'd expect, while the same time on Spotify eats through 5%. It conserves battery well when you're using it, which makes up for it. The lack of USB Type-C isn't a deal breaker, but it's disappointing for the longevity and feels like a misstep. Charging, too, isn't particularly fast. It takes about 2 hours to fully juice up the phone using the included charger. Should I buy the Honor 6X? Considering the huge marketing push Honor is giving the 6X, it's surprising just how dull and samey this handset actually is. Although the specs appear attractive, the device doesn't really use them in a meaningful way. The CPU is fine, for example, but it's bogged down by the old software. The dual camera isn't strong enough to be anything more than a gimmick. It does have a solid screen and hopefully a software update will come, but I'd still recommend the cheaper Moto G4 Plus, Wiley Fox Swift 2X or one of the other affordable phones. Verdict: Honor's brand image is clearly more important than the products it creates. The 6X is a fine phone that doesn't really use what it has very well. It will get the job done but nothing more.